Hello and welcome again to the Skillwork Forum. I'm Tim, as always, joined with my partner Brett, and we gather on these podcasts to talk about industry trends, issues, really just things affecting the skilled trades and those who depend on skilled trades to advance their business. So today we're going to talk about a topic that we all have to embrace as business leaders, and that's change. And an old adage says that the only constant in life is change. I guess you throw in taxes and death with that as well, but change is constantly happening. Definitely today, in today's work environment, it seems like it's happening at a much more rapid pace, and it's much more impactful, Brett.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So, sometimes, change is necessary. Like you said, Tim, obviously, if you look just from a technology standpoint, change just seems to happen so much more rapidly today, and so we all know employees don't like change, but the truth is I don't think leaders like change either, and so, but I really think it's really what we want to focus on today, Tim, is what makes change really challenging is when it's poorly executed. It can become a double-edged sword leading to just a loss of productivity, and maybe even more crucial, your employees, they just lose trust in you, they become disgruntled, they don't understand. Are we just changing for the purpose of change?
Yeah, there's even a thing called change fatigue. People just get wore out from it. So this topic is fairly in-depth. As a matter of fact, we are going to do this in two separate episodes. The one you're watching now, followed by another one. So we feel like there's enough information here, and we found enough things that will hopefully be helpful for you. So in the first part of this two-part series, we're going to focus on really what are the factors, external and internal, that are driving change in our industry and the things we're seeing the most, and maybe just some generalized ideas about things that drive change. And the second part of this, which we invite you to watch that as well. In the second part, we're going to say, well, how do you effectively implement, track, and make sure that the change that you're putting in place is going to have the effect that you're hoping for. So two-part series. The first one here, let's just kick it off with this study by Gartner that we kind of looked into a little bit.
Yeah, so Gartner's a technology consulting firm, and so they had two things. I think it kind of lays the groundwork for where we're going to head in some of this conversation. But it said they had two things that came out in a recent report. It said the typical organization today has undertaken 5 major firm-wide changes in the past 3 years. So, that's significant. We talk about it here, Tim. It's like sometimes, we're a newer company. We've basically been in business, for about 5 years. And we talk about sometimes we just need to let it settle a little bit. Let's see the impact of it and before we change it again. And and also they said nearly 75% expect to multiply the types of major change initiatives they will undertake in the next 3 years.
Yeah, so this is not going away. Some other information that came out of that report, which I think I've experienced, probably we all have, but they say, according to this report by Gartner, half of all change initiatives fail. Half, 50%. Only 34% would be considered clear successes. So a third are successful. 50% are deemed to be clear failures. Now, a math guy can start looking at these stats and go, wait a minute, it doesn't quite add up to 100, but follow along with the general qualitative focus of what they're saying here, that 50% are deemed to be clear failures, like not even questionable. And then a further 16% of those, mixed results, had some positive effect, some negative effect. So clearly, change is hard. Captain Obvious statement there, change is hard. And the odds of executing a smooth transition really are in favor of those that do so with a lot of forethought and execution. Here's the thing with change as leaders. We think our ideas are amazing, and we think our change is everybody's going to embrace it, and of course it's going to work. And I think there's a little bit of self-awareness. First of all, you have to go into this with the idea that there's going to be some headwinds the minute you say you're going to change something significant.
Yeah, it's the old, I'm probably been guilty of it, and I've definitely worked in some organizations where I know it has, the leader of the company, listens to a podcast or reads a book over the weekend, and
that doesn't happen here now.
And on Monday we're making changes, and so
it's like going to a marriage conference. All right,
right. So sometimes you need to marinate on it a little bit, and those kinds of things. And so, but the pace of change has never been greater. In the space that we operate in primarily, we're a staffing company, so we do travel staffing for skilled trades. and that's primarily, in the manufacturing space. And so that in the last couple years, Tim, we've personally experienced through just the advancement in technology and automation, just very rapid change in these facilities. We've discussed it. I don't know what podcast number, maybe I should have known, but we've discussed it in length, what is referred to the fourth industrial revolution, also referred to, or inside of that is the Internet of Things, this whole smart manufacturing, the integration of supply chain and that. And, when we've talked about it, if you've watched this podcast before, you probably know that I have a manufacturing background, spent 30 plus years in that space. And I always used to say we made automation changes to the facilities to some degree. This isn't totally fair, but some of the automation changes, we did it because it was cool, because it was the cool. They look at this new thing we got. It's like getting the new sports car. What has changed now, and the reason why I think you're seeing a much more need to be able to manage through it, and the significance and the speed of it is now it's survival. Facilities now have no choice. The return is not just a matter of return on investments. It's we can't find the front end help.
Yeah.
So we have to automate. So with that, then comes these other things that we deal with, and then how you're going to operate that.
Yeah.
That automation.
So it's one thing to put a new piece of equipment out there. That brings about change, but you got to recognize that it requires people out there to make sure that they can, install, troubleshoot, repair, et cetera. And, you got to bring them along with that. And so in the second part, we'll give you some ideas on how to do that. But these are some other factors. So the automation, that's definitely a factor driving this rapidly, evolving landscape where change seems to be happening all the time. The second thing is just the fact that we have changing demographics out there in the workforce. The workforce for the first time is now mostly comprised of millennials. They have taken over the Gen Xers and the boomers, so that we're talking about workers ages 26 to 41. They now make up the largest percentage of the workforce. The Gen Xers are 41 to 55, and the boomers are age 56 plus. So that would be maybe, it would be me, and maybe you. So we are no longer driving the bus, so to speak. There's other people, and so we got to start thinking about that. So what are some things that drive change, or how do they deal with change? Number one, they greatly value flexible schedules and more relaxed working environments. Keep that in mind as you implement change. A lot of times change requires you to be very strict and kind of rigid as you implement this change. That doesn't necessarily fit in with their approach and their desire. The other thing is they are less trusting of leaders. They have learned to be less trusting of leadership, and they're more likely to balk at uncertainty. So they are not going to be embracing change right away, just naturally resistant, even more so than those of us in other generations. The third thing is that, remember, Brett mentioned that the impact of your employees, they get very disgruntled, and we all know about the Great Resignation and people leaving. The millennials are less loyal to an employer and more likely to leave if unsatisfied. So you start implementing change, you do it incorrectly, you're going to end up with a lot of your workforce walking out the door because they can get a job right down the road tomorrow. So.
Mm-hmm. I just heard actually this morning, Tim, I think a lot of people thought that, there seemed to be a very fluid movement of people between jobs. Like we just said, they're very quick to leave. And I think some people, we tend to, we've been in a pattern for a while now where we blame everything on COVID. I just heard a report this morning that said that trend is continuing. They're still seeing that same willingness to leave one position to take another position and that type of thing. So it kind of feeds in to what you're saying. And the old career progression, my dad, I'm sure probably your dad, we've talked about it, in lots of other podcasts. There was just a very linear and predictable process. You put in your time, you gained your experience. There was almost a seniority pecking order. Many people stayed in the same career or the same facility or the same company, 30, 40, 50 years. It was a common thing. My grandmother, worked for General Electric for ever, I think. And so
She worked with Thomas Edison, I think. back in-
she may have. So she's not with us anymore. She's with Thomas, hopefully.
Yeah, she's with
well, I
Thomas.
don't know. I don't know where Thomas is. I know where she's at.
Yeah,
so,
good.
So there's just that, so today's work environment, it's very unpredictable career progression. You're constantly moving the goalposts, rapidly evolving, skills. And so today, where before you might have been, okay, I start in this position at 25, I'm a mechanic, and little by little, I work my way up the ladder. Today, because of the skill set, you could come in very early, and if you have the competency to be able to master those skills, you're gonna jump the system.
Yeah.
And so it's a change thing. And if those opportunities aren't there, there's a greater tendency you're going to go find them.
Yeah. So people kind of like to know where they're going, where they're headed. People like to know the direction. And more than ever, the ability to track, I do X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to be able to move up and take this position. That's changed. And you throw in some significant change in the environment that further exacerbates the issue. So on the previous point, the changing demographics and the millennials, just a current news event. Everybody's probably watching the purchase of, some people call it takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk. And I just saw today that this week went out letter to everybody, no more virtual working. Everybody has to report to the office. That place, that Taj Mahal of a building they had been pretty much a ghost town. So he said, no, everybody's going to report to work. I'm wondering how that's gonna go over, because I know that there are people who've embraced that and like that. So there's a lot of change going on Twitter right now.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to track how that goes. So,
yeah, for sure.
So the other factor that makes change a little bit more difficult, and we see a lot in the world we live in, is that the pace of change. We mentioned it out front, but the pace of restructuring and reorganizing and reinventing and dropping one product line and added another one. We already noted that nearly 75% expect to multiply the types of major change initiatives they will undertake in the next 3 years. That's 3/4 are going to begin to change, and it's constantly changing and evolving. So now you look around, you add in the current economic factors that we see, uncertainty. I just saw the inflation numbers. That's still not looking good. Political upheaval. We're in the election season right now. There's a never before seen movement of people. You mentioned it earlier, Brett, the Great Resignation going on. So there's just a lot of fluidity in our culture right now. All this equals tremendous transformation and the need to adapt to these changing dynamics in your workforce. So change has always been there. Now you overlay increasing change with all these factors we just talked about. It's going to make it more difficult, and you need to do it with your eyes wide open.
Yeah, there's a recent study from the American Psychological Association. So obviously, people that really look at behaviors and impact, cultural impact to cultures and those things. They found that organizational changes such as restructuring, new systems or technology, or new leadership can lead to the following: employees who are overly stressed. So change creates stress. And again, we'll talk about it some more, but, so how you handle that. So workers that have less trust in their employers, we talked about that a minute ago. If employees don't understand and you don't communicate with them why you're changing, it will begin to erode trust. And so those then lead to increased desire to find new jobs, adding to the Great Resignation. I just talked about it a second ago, when we talked about that trend is continuing. It's not a COVID thing, it's a thing. And it's just continuing to happen. So you could say, it's a risky proposition to change without a well thought out plan for doing so. I would only add to that, change, as you started the podcast, Tim, change is inevitable. And so you can say, well, what we don't want to put out there is to say, well, then just don't change. You could ask Blockbuster how that worked out. And so change has to happen. It's really how you got to have a high level of awareness And like you said in the next podcast, the part B of this, we'll get into a little bit more of the how
to do it.
implementation.
Yeah, so right, change is going to happen, so we can't stick our head in the ground. I think sometimes we get a little too enamored with change. We change for the sake of change. New leaders come in, they want to put their stamp on it. I think being thoughtful about the change you put in and make sure that you look at the return on investment, the risk versus reward. You will slow down before you speed up with any change. I've seen it time and time again. You're going to slow down before you speed up. So if the idea for change is to increase efficiency or go faster, recognize that that's not going to happen right away. And also recognize that a portion, I don't know if it's a significant portion, but a portion of your workforce is not going to handle it well. You're already, generally speaking, you're overstressing your workforce because you don't have enough of the guys that we supply. You're working long hours. Demand continues to rise. People have inflationary pressures on their home life. Costs are going up. And now you throw change in the middle of that. All these things add to continuing the challenge that we're seeing with keeping great people employed on your staff. So those are kind of some of the factors that we wanted to introduce today about why are we having change, what's driving it, what are some of the things to look at. That's part one. We invite you to click in and listen to the second part. It's a little bit more, and we're going to shift gears a little bit more to talk about what do you do. Brett just mentioned you got to have a well thought out plan. So what do you do? How do you do it? How do you do change in a thoughtful way? That'll be part two. So again, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Skillwork Forum. We're grateful for you, and make sure you join us for the next half. I think it'll be helpful for you. God bless and have a great day.